Welcome back to Homer, Alaska. Today we're along the shoreline here of Ketchikan Bay. It's just a beautiful and gorgeous landscape here in Alaska. And what do we have in store for you today? Well, it's this guy right here. It's a Canon RF 1-400 lens. And to me, this is one of the best beginner wildlife lenses and a hiking and travel lens. Just an incredible lens, sharpness, price, and weight. Just an amazing guy. But rather than show you a bunch of charts and specs and things like that, we're going to take you out here along the shoreline of Ketchikan Bay and show you what this lens can do. So let's talk about it. Okay, let's start off with why do I say that this is a great starter wildlife photography lens for new wildlife photographers and for hiking and travel lens? Well, three things. One is weight, price, and the quality of this lens. Talk about weight first. This guy weighs at 1.3 pounds. You pair it with the R7, which is about 1.5, you're under 3 pounds for the whole rig. This thing is light, easy to carry around. It's also very compact. The lens alone, just without the lens hood and the camera, is 6.5 inches. So you can stuff this guy in almost any little sling bag, travel bag, anything. It's real easy to travel with. Light, compact. Next thing that makes it really good for starters and just a good lens just to have in your repertoire is the price of this guy. This lens new, list price is $650, which is incredible to start with. But if you can find it refurbished or on sale like I did, it runs about $499. Right now, refurb lenses have been running $499, just $519 from Canon. You can even find this guy from reputable sellers, used sellers, from $350 to about $450. So that's why for price, this guy is incredible, especially look at the image quality. I was really shocked at the image quality of this lens and what it can do is minimum focus, things like that. But rather than talk about that, just tell you it's good, let's go out here and show you. So let's go do it.
Cold rain, making rivers on my window late last night. Cold rain, cold rain. Rain in the shadow, and my head on my window pane. Shadow, don't you bother me anymore. Don't you darken up my door. Shadow, don't you follow me anymore. Just lie and stay there on the floor. Sunshine, shine on this frail head of mine. Sunshine, sunshine. You've been making shadows wherever I go. Shadow, don't you bother me anymore. Don't you darken up my door. Shadow, don't you follow me anymore. Just lie and stay there on the floor. Lie and stay there on the floor. Coyotes, they've been yipping all night just like back home. Coyote, coyote, laughing in the shadows and how their eyes do glow. Shadow, don't you bother me anymore. Don't you darken up my door. Shadow, don't you follow me anymore. Just like I'd stay there on the floor. Shall I stay there on the floor?
This is only a little bit of the flock, so I'm hoping maybe the rest will fly in here on me here in a little bit. If I don't get too wet from the surf, that is. Yeah, this little combo is so great for this. It's so light, the R7, the R400. And basically I'm getting 640 on the reach, the equivalent focal length. So that's really nice. So I can, get a good distance from these guys and still get shots. And this little lens is really sharp. I really like it. It's just for the price of it and the sharpness of it and the quality you get out of it. It's so cool. So these poor little guys with the waves are just try to get out there and feed a little bit and bathe, and the waves are just washing right over. It's pretty funny. So they're having about as much fun as I am right now. It's miserable right here. Well, it looks like the rest of the flock flew by me, went way behind me. I've got a little bit of a flock here in front of me, but they keep going that way. And I've got a couple seagulls above me that keep getting close to these guys and spooking them and pushing them away from me. So I think I'm gonna have to go reset and go look for something else, because these guys just don't want to have anything to do with me or these birds above my head. So we're gonna move somewhere else, see what else we can find. But and it's miserable right here anyway. So we're probably gonna go to the other side where it's a little more block in the wind. Probably look for otters, eagles, anything else we can find. May come back over here later when the wind dies down. See if we get some more shots of these sandpipers. Sandpiper's my favorite, one of my favorite things to photograph. But right now it's just not working out very good. It happens. It happens. I think I got a few cool shots and a little bit of video. So we got that. So let's go do that, and I'll talk to you here in a bit. These otters are so fun. We've got one kind of up on the dock and the other ones are out in the water. There's about 9 of them right here. So cool. And one will come in every once in a while, then another will leave. So they've just kind of been working in and out of here. So it's just so fun in the winter with these otters. Highlights of my day. I've been laying out here probably for 2 hours, kind of moving different spots, photographing and video of these guys with the RF 100-400. It's been really good. It's such a fun lens to shoot out, especially with the R7, because it's so light, just super light rig, and the stabilization in video is just incredible. Because I'll be holding it there looking, and it'll look a little shaky, but once I hit that record button, that sucker just locks in. The R7 is great for video. This RF 100-400 to me is really a really good videography lens for wildlife and stuff. I don't know if you can hear it, but that baby otter's out there whining. There's 2 babies out here. One's really young, the other one's a little older. They can both get under the water right now, so they're probably a couple months old or more. But it's still so much fun to watch them. But like I said, this little combo is so fun for this type of work right here, because I can pull back to 100 and go up to 400 just for the price of this lens and what it can deliver. It's just such a fun lens, and you don't worry about it as much. If you do break it, you know, you don't want to lose $400-500. You know, used these are 400, new it's only 650, but you can find a refurb for 500 bucks a lot. Yeah, just a great lens for what I'm doing today, walking around these docks, just finding what I can find. Just having a blast. It is cold right now. That wind it's coming across this spit. Before I came down here, it said it's going to be light and variable winds, but now that stuff out there's got to be blowing 30 over the other side of the spit. But fun. So I'm gonna move out of here. I'm getting kind of cold, so I'm gonna go warm up a little bit, get some lunch, and then we'll sit down and talk about this lens. We'll talk about its image quality, its build, everything, you know, the good and the bad about this lens. I mean, for the price, it's really good, but we'll go through everything about what the reality of this lens is and who it's for and all those kinds of things. But it's so hard to leave these otters, especially when you got like 9 of them right here, and this one laying on the dock. Just keep looking at it every once in a while as I talk. It's just cute. Fun time. But let's go get some lunch, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this lens in depth. See you in just a bit.
When I get old and I get cold, when you have to hand down your crown, when I get torn and I get worn, hand me down, hand me down, hand me down, hand me down. And when my songs don't strike a chord, when you stop coming around, when you get smart or you get bored, hand me down, hand me down, hand me down, hand me down. I do all those things I said, but I never did. You know I would, you know I would. You know I would. You know you know I would. You know when you just can't stand the pain, when you just can't stand the sound, Don't throw me out in that cold, cold rain. No, no. Hand me down, hand me down. Hand me down, hand me down. And don't you hang me out to dry. When you see that dark, dark cloud, don't throw me out, 'cause I'll die. Hand me down, hand me down. Hand me down, hand me down. I do all those things I said, but I never did. You know I would, you know I would. You know I would. You know I. You know I would. You know I. Don't throw me out in that cold, cold rain. No, no. Hand me down, hand me down. Don't throw me out in that cold, cold rain. No, no. Hand me down, hand me down. Hand me down, hand me down. Hand me down, hand me down. Hand me down, hand me down.
All right, now we got a chance to sit down. Let's talk about the specifics of this lens. So this lens is 100 to 400 millimeters, 5.6 to f8. $650 list, and if you can find it on sale or refurbished, it's $499 usually to $519. But sometimes you can find it used down to $350 to $450. The lens is 1.3 pounds, so it makes it one of the lightest lenses in its focal range on the market. It's 6.5 inches from the mount to the end of the lens, which makes it really easy to pack into bags and sling bags, small things like that. But it's very, very compact. It has no tripod collar, which means you're going to have a harder time using it on gimbals, but it's not really a lens that's used on a gimbal anyway because how light it is. Now, it doesn't come with a lens hood, so you've got to go buy one. The one I have on here is from Canon, but you can also get one that's a JJC. And you do need to put a lens hood on here because it protects your lens for one and also reduces lens flare from light on the side. So you can buy the one from Canon, which I have on my lens, which is the ET74B for $45. Or there's a JJC one, an ET74B, also for $15. And I've looked at it also, and it's a really nice lens hood, so you can't go wrong with either one of them. Even though the lens is made of plastic, it doesn't feel really cheap. It feels really good in the hand. You get minimal buttons on this lens. You get a stabilizer on and off switch, and you get autofocus manual focus switch. Control ring is out here on the end of the lens, which I really like, and the focus. The throw for your focal range is here towards the back, and it's only about a third of a twist to get the throw, which is really nice also. It's really smooth. You also don't get any lens creep whatsoever. You do have a lock switch on this side, so when you are at 100, you can lock the lens so it won't move. But like I said, there is no lens creep. I can shake this really hard and nothing really happens on it. So that's really nice on that part. Okay, let's talk about the apertures of this lens, which is concerned to most folks, but I don't really think that's much of a problem. So let's start with at 5.6, and that runs from the 100 to 122 millimeter range. When we hit 6.3, we're at 123 to 156, and then at 7.1, we're at 156 millimeters to 258 millimeters. And the final aperture is f8 at 259 millimeters all the way up to 400 millimeters. That f8 may give some folks concern, but remember that f8 aperture is how we can get this lens in at the weight and the price of this lens. If it was a faster aperture, you know, getting down to f7, f5.6, something like that, the lens would be heavier, it'll be a lot more expensive. So just remember that. So When you've got lenses, you got to remember that the aperture, the focal range, those type of things, and the weather sealing all go into the cost and the weight of lenses. The more of those features, the heavier the lens you get, the more expensive it gets. We'll talk a bit about shooting at that f8 aperture and if it's an issue or not a little bit later. All right, let's talk about image stabilization. This guy has 5.5 stops of image stabilization. You add a body like the R7 has IS in it, you get 6 stops. So in video, that makes this guy extremely good for shooting video for image stabilization. This guy, to me, is really one of the better ones to sit there because it's so light and the weight is so good that when I'm hand holding for video, it's real easy to keep that subject where I want to keep it. The stabilization is also very good in stills, and you can get down some really low shutter speeds holding this guy when you're shooting, which is really nice because you're f8, you're going to have to drop that shutter speed sometimes to get some of these shots. And what's even more interesting is this guy has a half stop better image stabilization than the RF 1-500. But if you use both lenses on an R7, you're really not going to notice that half stop of difference in image stabilization. But it's interesting this has just a touch more than RF 100-500. And again, that's really nice on a lens of this price. Now let's talk about the image quality of this lens. And this is something that really shocked me with this lens, especially coming in at $500 to $650 for a lens of this type. Now, also remember that there's much more to a photo than sharpness and IQ. You've got the subject, you've got your exposure, you've got the composition and lighting and the type of light, and editing adds so much to that IQ factor. But you got to remember there's a lot more to an image than just sharpness. So you got to remember all those factors go into the image quality of a lens. And just remember, regardless of the gear you have in your hand, that the image is only as good as the person behind the camera in understanding their craft in wildlife photography. Let's start by talking about the IQ of this lens and controlled testing, and then we'll talk about the real-world results of the IQ in the field. This lens is very sharp in the center, and the edges do fall off just a bit. There is some fringing at the edge, but not major amounts or anything that really distract you unless you have those wild, crazy lighting situations that will give any lens fits. Some blooming does happen away from the middle of the image towards the edges of the lens, but not really fringing really, because this lens really controls fringing really well. But there is a little bit of a lighter bloom sometimes at the edge in some extreme light conditions. As stated earlier, the center is really good in all the focal ranges. Edges, like I said, do drop off a bit in sharpness and in contrast, but it still looks really fairly acceptable. Not drastic for wildlife usually, as we really don't care too much, or at least I don't care too much about the edges of the image. I want those to fall off and lose contrast and lose sharpness anyway, because that's where my nice bokeh usually exists. Stopping down does improve the sharpness and the contrast along the edges a little bit, but not really a major change. And for the price though, it's very good performance. And again, for me, the corners to me aren't that much of an issue, as we usually try to use the rule of thirds to keep our subject within the rule of thirds and not out there on the edges, and that way when those fall off and blow out, that's where I want it anyway. So let's talk about the different focal range of this guy. So at 100 millimeters, it's pretty sharp in the middle. The corners do fall off just a tad, just a touch, but not a whole lot. At 200 millimeters, it gets a little sharper across the frame. At 300 millimeters at f8, it's very good, but at f11, it gets a touch better in the contrast. Now you could add contrast in post to get the image the same way at f8 to look like f11, so it's really not much of an issue. When we get out to 400 millimeters, it looks really good. But dropping down to f11 does improve the contrast and the sharpness in the corners again, but not as much at 200 and 300, but when you look at those, how the stopping down helps. So really stopping down to f11 versus f8 really doesn't help you a whole lot, especially for wildlife photography, because again, the center looks good, but the edges do soften up just a touch, not a whole lot. So if you see these test images I'm showing you, you can see kind of where that does fall off a little bit, not a whole lot. It's really not enough to really say, oh wow, that's really horrible in the corners, so it's really good. Now, you're going to notice this much more if you're in the studio shooting in a controlled environment. But once you get outside and shoot in the real world, you're going to notice things are a little bit different. Now, one thing I did notice on this lens, that the RF 100-400 on its light gathering, or what you would call the T value, is a little bit lower, because when I use the 2-800 or the 1-500 or even the E up to 7200, the same images that I'm looking at, I'm noticing that those images are just a touch brighter than the RF 1-400 when you're shooting the images back to back. Again, it's not really that big of an issue, but it does exist. The last thing we're going to talk about is color addition of this lens. Again, really shocked me. The colors on this lens are really, really good, the color addition that is. I noticed when I was shooting the sandpipers at early morning that the colors look just as good as they did on the 2-800 lens and the RF 1-500 lens in the same type of condition with the sun coming up across those sandpipers. So I was really happy with the color addition of this lens, and when I go to edit the images, I really don't notice that much difference editing the image on this guy versus the 2-800, the RF 1-500 and things like that. So the color addition is fantastic on this lens. Okay, now let's talk about the real world out in the field IQ of using this lens. Okay, let's look at this shot first. And I think this shot looks really good. But this image actually was a little bit soft, and that was due to my mess up in shooting the shot. But with a little bit of creative editing, I was able to cover the shot a little bit more. And it goes to show you that actually a shot actually is better with comp and subject, and where you're putting things in the frame and getting it aligned right and isolating your animal to get that blur or that blowout on the animal. So again, it's really more important about getting your subject lined up right, getting your depth of field, things like that, which is much more important sometimes than sharpness of an image. I actually had a few weeks back, if you go back and look where the videos, I've got some buffleheads flying off. The image is actually very soft and it's got image blur on it, but it was a really nice image with the way I composed the light and all those things that came up in a very pleasant image. But if you pixel peeped all the way into that bird, he's not extremely sharp. It's just because of the way I was shooting through the grass, the time of day, the way the light was hitting the lens, all those kinds of things caused softness that I can't get around, but it made a really cool shot. So sometimes what I'm getting down to is, if you could get a good shot, you don't have to have it extremely sharp. And to be honest with you, even with this lens and other lenses, when I'm looking at my images, they're too sharp. The fur on an otter sometimes may be too sharp and too rigid. So I'll actually take the texture in Lightroom and bring the texture down to soften that fur up a little bit, because I don't want it so rigid and sharp. So sharpness is not everything in an image. Okay, look at another shot here we can look at, and this shot is very sharp across the subject. Great detail and color. And if you notice, the corners are blowing out, and this is what I was talking about when I'm not as worried about the corners getting softer, because the corners in this one is where all my bokeh is. And the softness and contrast and the loss that this lens could have at the edge is really not an image to me, but that's just how I shoot. The detail in the images is very, very good and crisp on this lens. And over the last 2.5 years that I've used this lens, all the images I've taken with this lens have been really sharp and very crisp. And that color addition we talked about in the studio settings, well, it holds up really well out in the real world also. It produces very nice colors, and when playing with the exposure, I'm able to really push and pull those colors into the warm and cool areas that I need to when I'm out in the field. And this is very good, as I prefer to get it right in the field and get it right in the camera, then I don't have to edit as much when I get back home. Now, close focusing ability, that's another really cool feature of this camera. The magnification of this camera is 0.41 times, and the minimum focus distance is 3.4 feet, which gives a great magnification when getting really close up to something for some pseudo macro shots. It's not a true macro lens, but it gives you that type of ability at 400 millimeters to really blow out those backgrounds and get some real interesting shots. You can shoot flowers and bugs and things like that right at your feet, and I've done that a lot of times when I'm out hiking out into Hatcher's Pass and places like that. Now let's talk about shooting this guy with wildlife out in the field, what really matters, and what I like and what I dislike about this lens. The first thing we talk about is autofocus. Just start off right now telling you the autofocus in this guy is very good. It uses a single nano USM motor, and that's really impressive because the Canon RF 1-500 lenses uses dual nano USM motors, and this guy uses one. I would expect this lens to actually be an STM or stepping motor versus a USM motor, so that's really cool for this guy, and that makes it really snappy and really fast. And I've noticed it's just almost as fast as me as the RF 1-500 and the 2-800 lens when it's using for autofocus is really, really good and really snappy. And I think that single motor works really good in this guy because this guy is so light and so small, and the components are so much lighter that one motor can really jump that autofocus where it needs to be. Now, shooting this guy on a full frame camera, the R5 Mark II. At 400 millimeters, it's really good if you're shooting a lot of bigs, moose, bears, things like that, deer. If you're shooting small birds, though, it can be a little limiting at 400 millimeters on a full frame camera unless you can get really close like I could get with these sandpipers. But where this lens really shines to me is on a crop sensor camera like the R7 and the R10. That's where this guy really gets good, because now you're at 640 equivalent millimeters of that, so you can get out there and really shoot some stuff. Like when I shot this hawk owl that came around, which is really cool. I love shooting that hawk owl. It was a blast shooting that guy, because I love finding owls because they're really harder to find. And this lens, actually is the lens I had in my hand when it popped out. Yes, would I rather have the 2 to 800 or my 500 f4 with the 1.4 teleconverter? Yes, I would rather have that. But I was really surprised at what I got out of this lens and how well it did. But where it really shined was in the video when I was shooting that hawk owl. When I hit this thing, holding up, but since this lens is combo so light, it was so easy to keep that guy in frame and not have a lot of wiggle and move for my own body movements. Because even though the image stabilization can be great on these cameras, if you can't hold yourself steady, it doesn't matter how good the IS is in the camera. And by shooting this guy on the R7 and the R10, that's where I talk about with beginners and people that are just getting into wildlife photography, or maybe you shoot a lot of different things, but you do want to shoot wildlife. By shooting the R10 and this lens, you could be getting down into $1,500 for your complete camera rig, or with the R7, you could be around $2,000 for your complete rig. And that's what I suggested to my uncle Don to use when he first got back into wildlife photography. I told him, go buy this setup, the R7 and this RF1 to 400, to see if you really wanted to get back into it, not spend $1,000, you know, get into it about $2,000 and move from there. And he's stuck with that for the last couple of years, and he gets incredible shots. He was out in Lake Island where he was working for quite a while, and he had a lot of boobies and albatrosses and birds that I don't really see here that were really cool, and he got incredible images. Even when he's back in Oklahoma, he takes great images. When he's up here shooting me, he shoots this same rig all the time and gets incredible images. So this lens is a very good lens, and it pairs well with the teleconverter. We'll talk about that here in a minute also. Now, let's talk about f8 aperture in the wild at 400 millimeters. Yes, in low light conditions, you're going to have to find a way to get light for this lens, because f8 minimum aperture. So we talked about f9 and the 2 to 800, and even the 1 to 500 at 7.1. When you're shooting lower light, you're going to have to figure out a way to get light. But the good thing is you can either shoot at a lower shutter speed because of the IS in this lens, which makes it really nice, or you can add some more ISO to your image. And with these modern noise reduction software and capabilities we have now, it kind of negates the issue of shooting those higher ISOs. So f8, RF1 to 500 at 7.1, or the f8 you get at the 2 to 800. We all learned how to shoot at those apertures, really. So if you don't really have an f4 lens or a faster lens, you're always going to have those type of problems. Now, that's for light considerations at that f8 aperture, but what about backgrounds in bokeh? Well, this goes more about learning your craft of wildlife photography, and which you never stop learning, basically. Always keep practicing and experimenting with what you're doing and learning what those things are to make your more pleasing back bokeh, or things that you want to see in the bokeh, like little specular balls and things like that. And using this lens with the higher aperture, you got to do some more work. Any of these higher aperture lenses, you got to do more work to get those type of pleasing backgrounds. You have to work your angles more on the subject to achieve the type of blur you want in your backgrounds and the points of interest you want to make in your subject. So really what that means is, if you're shooting down on a subject, your distance between your subject and your background is closer, which is not going to help you. When you're shooting at f2.8 or f4, you can shoot down on them if you've got enough separation there, because it's going to fall off quicker. But at f8 or f7.1, like with 1 to 500, things like that, it's not going to fall off as fast. You're going to see more of that background in focus, and you want the blur. So what you've got to do is you've got to find a way to, usually getting low, to cause separation between your subject and your backgrounds. If I'm shooting like this down, I'm going to get this wood here. It's going to be in focus, so I'm shooting at this angle. But if I start flattening out and shoot more this angle, all this wood, let's say I'm going down this table the other way, if I'm shooting flatter, then all this wood's going to start to blur out and not be as in focus, and it looks more pleasing. It gets more of a soft blur, things like that. Same with your subject between your background. Find the angles. If I'm shooting against this wall, I'm going to see more in focus, but if I angle my move around that way, my subject can shoot more that direction, I'm going to get more separation between my subject and the background and get more pleasing bokeh. So with higher apertures, that's what you got to remember, is how to get better separation between your subject and the backgrounds at higher apertures to get those pleasing things. And that's what I had to do out here in the field a lot with these animals. Like when I shoot down, I probably showed you an image, when I'm shooting down on that otter, it doesn't look as pleasing. One, the angle of the animal doesn't look as good, and you're seeing too much in focus. But once I got down on the ground and got eye level with that otter, where I could separate more between the otter and the boats and the harbor and stuff like that, then it started blurring out and looked more pleasing to the eye. So you just had to find those angles that give you that smooth water, pleasing bokeh, and the foliage, reflections, things like that in the water. So that's what you have to do. And just remember that every lens has its limitations. And this lens is not an L lens, and those lenses are more expensive. This is a very, very inexpensive lens. You're going to have to work with those trade-offs. And the weather sealing is one of the trade-offs. This doesn't have as much weather sealing as your other lenses. The weather seal on this lens, what I'm saying, is not as good as your RF-1-500, your L series lenses. So make sure you put this in a cover. But I've had it in a little bit of snow and things like that, and it's not giving me any issues whatsoever. No fogging, none of that kind of stuff. So it's been really good with that. And everybody asks about bird in flight. How does it work on every camera lens I review? Well, this lens, just like all the other ones, it shoots birds in flight extremely well. And that f8 aperture really helps with those birds in flight to get more of the bird in focus when it's flying across the scene. I haven't had any problem shooting birds in flight with this lens. It works really, really good. All right, the conclusion, who this lens is for. Overall, this lens is a great little lens from Canon. It's a great wildlife lens. There's not really anything like it on the market currently. How light the lens is, its close focus and distance, the ability to use full focal range with its teleconverters, the sharpness and IQ, and the price of this lens, all those factors combined make this one of, if not the best wildlife lenses for the price versus performance. And who is this lens for? To me, it's an amazing lens for a beginner, and one that I would always suggest to anyone getting started with wildlife photography. Paired with the R7 or the R10, it's an amazing and inexpensive combo to get started in your journey in the field. And I also think it's a great lens for travel for those who want to photograph some wildlife and get some landscape and family shots to boot. And for working professionals, I always think it's a great backup rig to put in your backpack and in your passenger seat when you're going out. And if you shoot video, it's an amazing lens for video. It's got the great focal range to get almost any shot you need, and has that great stabilization to really be able to handhold that shot really easily. And at the end of the day, it shows that wildlife photography doesn't require a ton of money to get out in the field and enjoy yourself. This is just a fantastic lens with great image quality and insanely low price tag that everyone who shoots Canon should at least try out or pick up if you see one on sale or used. That's my thoughts on this lens. It's a great lens for a beginner. It's a great lens just to have just as a backup lens, because if you got your big heavy lens but you need a backup lens, you could always throw that in your pack and it takes up no room and extremely light. So that's what I think about this lens, guys, and I hope you can get out there and try this lens and play with it, see what it's like for yourself. And as always, until next time, guys, get outside and go run that shutter.